Have you ever said to yourself, I can't wait till I get older and no one will tell me what to do. I'll get to make my own decisions and no one is going to control me. No one will control my thinking. No one will control my actions. Didn't we say that as a youth? But then we find out as we got a little older, perhaps as we got to high school, there was people telling us what to do. Perhaps when we became a young adult and we got our first job, there was someone telling us what to do. As we got married, there was someone telling us what to do. When we had children, telling us what to do. So it seems like throughout life, there's no escape from receiving instructions from one source or another. However, as we make these decisions and as we get these instructions, we realize that there are times where we reach a point in our life where there's no one there to give us instructions. We have to make our own decision. And those times like that, we actually wish there was someone there to tell us what to do. What do I do? And it's kind of tough. Have you ever found yourself driving, maybe you have your GPS plugged in and you want to get to a certain destination? What do you hear as you're traveling? You hear the little voice, turn here, continue on this road. And at times it gets a little bit annoying, doesn't it? But you really have to have it to get to where you're going. The old way were the maps. We had the maps, but they were a little dangerous. You had to unfold them and you're driving and trying to get to where you're going. So it's a little bit convenient to have that little voice to tell you, go this way or go that way. And it's a blessing. However, there are some times when perhaps you have an older model GPS or the one that comes in your car and it's not up to date and it's not accurate. And you'll find that it'll give you wrong instructions sometimes. And you find yourself disappointed because what you thought was going to be reliable turned out not to be very reliable. That's the same about our lives as we live as Christians. We try to make it through this life. And there are times we're faced with a decision to make and we go to someone for advice. And we'll even use the scriptures to get advice, but maybe we misunderstood it a little bit. Or perhaps we didn't have all the facts. And so we end up making a decision, or maybe we listened to someone and it didn't turn out exactly like we thought it would. The reason this happens is because we're imperfect. Humans are imperfect. We give bad advice. A lot of times we base our advice, our instructions on sentiment, which means, well, this is how I feel. We should do it this way because, we've always done it this way. Or perhaps we use guesswork. Well, I think we should do it this way because of that, but I really don't know. Maybe we should do it this way, and you still get nowhere. And then there's limited experience. This is the one you get from, well, we did it this way this time and it kind of worked out, or we did it that way and it didn't work out, so let's do it this way. So all of those things combine to making an imperfect decision. Sometimes it turned out right, but sometimes it's just chance. So what do we do when we're faced with a situation like this? Turn with me in your Bible to Proverbs 16. This kind of sums up what is actually happening in our lives when we're faced with these types of decisions. Proverbs 16, verse 25, it says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. Now that's kind of fatalistic, but ultimately, we all end up dying. And all the decisions that we make, either they're going to have a relevance right now in the immediate future or sometime along the way. So either way, these coping with the life's problems cause us to make bad decisions. Sometimes we're faced with a problem and we choose to copy what we see on television or in the movies. And you see people robbing banks, robbing people for money. Perhaps a young man lost his job and he decides to rob someone so they can get money for his family. Or he associates with the wrong crowd and they influence him to take actions to make a living for his family, selling drugs or whatever he may be doing on the streets. So it's true that life's anxieties can cause us to make wrong decisions. That's why it's important for us to go to a source that will provide us with unerring decisions, instructions, where we know that when we follow those instructions, we can truly trust them, where there's no doubt. Just like in our song, there's no need to look back And because we know that the decision we made is the correct one because we based it on Bible instructions. And of course, we're talking about Jehovah God. We're not talking about Google Maps, even though it's a little bit up to date. We're talking about the Heavenly Father. He knows everything that's going on, just like with that GPS, when you use certain apps. As you're driving along the road, some of them, the more up-to-date ones, will actually tell you that there's a traffic condition on this road and it'll detour you. Well, Jehovah is the same way, or even much better on a grander scale. He sees what's going on in our life and he can see the ultimate end. And so he gives us that voice. No, don't do it this way. This is what will happen. Don't do it that way because this is what will happen. Do it this way. This is the way I want you to do it. And he does that for each one of us, whether we're young or old. He does it for us. And we will find out the more we trust Jehovah, we'll recognize that our way will be successful. And the reason we can also go to Jehovah is because everything we see in life, Jehovah has superior wisdom. He makes the earth go round. He makes the solar system work. He has a track record. He knows what will work for us. He knows what works for the universe. And as our designer, he knows what we are capable of doing. He will not ask us to move a mountain if we cannot move a mountain. He only asks us to do what we're capable of doing. So listening to Jehovah and listening to his instructions is kind of like driving your car with both hands on the wheel. So you recognize that as you're driving along, and of course if your car is in good condition, as you drive to the left, your steering wheel to the left or the right, you're always correcting your vehicle so that it stays straight on the path. If you take your hands off the wheel for any moment of time, especially if your car is not in great condition, it may pull to the left or to the right, or maybe there's potholes in the road. And so what happens? You bump, and so it's impossible to continue driving without having firm control of the steering wheel. And this is how our life will be when we listen to Jehovah. When we listen, it's like having both hands on the steering wheel and paying attention to the road and being aware of each condition as it comes up and be able to maintain control of the wheel. So as we listen to Jehovah and we recognize that our thinking has to agree with Jehovah God, then we'll actually recognize that there's changes that we need to make in our thinking. As we make those changes, we'll recognize that our thinking agrees with God's. One of the ways that we do this is in our attitude towards people. So we recognize that Jehovah disapproves of certain actions and activities in the world today. If we turn to Proverbs chapter 2, we can recognize what his instructions are. Proverbs 2. And we're looking at 11 through 15. It says here, thinking ability will keep watch over you, and discernment will safeguard you, to save you from the bad course, from the man speaking perverse things, from those leaving the upright paths, to walk in the ways of darkness, from those who rejoice in wrongdoing, from those who find joy in the perverseness of evil, those whose paths are crooked and whose entire course is devious. So when it comes to our attitude towards people, we're instructed to avoid these type of people. When we do this, it will not allow for our actions to be controlled, or we're being told what to do by these type of people, because they will influence to do wrong and things that are in disagreement with Jehovah's standards. We're warned not to imitate their way of life. Do we find ourselves watching television, watching these types of programs? Yeah, they're exciting, but do we find ourselves kind of glorifying those types of activities? We may not do it ourselves, but in reality, we're looking and we see this guy trying to get away, and I hope he gets away. And then at the end, the guy gets away with all the money, and he's throwing the money up in the air, and you're like, that's kind of cool. But no, that's not the attitude we should have. So if we find ourselves in our heart maybe agreeing with these and glorifying this a little bit, even just a little bit in our heart, that means our thinking needs to be changed, because Jehovah says he hates these kind of activities. And if we don't disagree with these kind of activities, if we find ourselves seeking the pleasures of the flesh, or seeking worldly associations, or pleasure seeking, putting too much emphasis on what feels good, or perhaps we're a little bit materialistic, then we have to realize that our thinking is not in agreement with God's, and we need to make a change from such a frustrating course. Also, we show that our thinking is in agreement with God when we are faithful in little things. One of the little things that we must address is dress and grooming. We know that today in this world, everything is designed to be revealing. Everything is designed to show off your sexuality, and it's not modest. It's so hard for the young ones today to be able to find, especially those sisters, to be able to find skirts that are decent, that are not too revealing. And it's because there's nobody out there who wants to make those types of dresses and that something that is modest. Even what they consider conservative and modest is still very short. The business suits that the sisters have, and the brothers or the men that have the real tight pants or whatever it may be. We have in the back a picture about it's a dress code for visiting Bethel, and we may kind of think, you know what, why should we have a list of clothes to wear and this and that? But Jehovah doesn't really give us a list. But how is it different from one of these restaurants? Even today, when people are all about tolerance and accepting everybody, there are still restaurants that have dress codes, and they will turn you away if you have a t-shirt and not a jacket on. If a worldly company can make that kind of rule, why not Jehovah? Jehovah says be modest. It's pretty simple. I'd like to read something to you from one of the watchtowers on dress and grooming. I'm going to read it directly from it. It says, appropriate standards of dress are important to us as Jehovah's people, and they are important to the God we worship. What the scriptures say about dress and grooming leaves no doubt that the sovereign of the universe has wholesome standards of attire for his true worshipers. Therefore, our choice of dress and grooming should not be determined only by what is pleasing to us. So sometimes our personal feelings are not the key decision maker. It should also take into account what is pleasing to the sovereign Lord Jehovah. For example, in God's law to the Israelites, there were rules that protected them against the open, immoral way of life of the nations around them. The law showed Jehovah's strong feelings against clothing that does not make clear distinction between male and female, what has been described in our day as unisex fashion. So let's take a moment and read Deuteronomy 22:5 to see the reference. (22:5) says, a woman must not put on the clothing of a man, nor should a man wear the clothing of a woman. For anyone doing so is detestable to Jehovah your God. So, it's pretty clear there. If we wear clothing, or if we see that we're tending towards clothing that there's no clear distinction, this is something detestable to Jehovah. The article continues. From God's stated direction about clothing, we clearly see that God is not pleased with the styles of dress that feminize men, that make women look like men, or that make it hard to see the difference between men and women. God's word contains principles that help Christians make good decisions about how to dress. And this is so no matter where they live, what their culture is, or what the climate is. We do not need detailed lists saying which styles of dress are acceptable and which are objectionable. Rather, we are guided by scriptural principles that help us determine the good and acceptable and perfect will of God when we are deciding what to wear. So this seems like a little thing, but it's a big thing because we are identified by how we look. And when people see us, when they see us at work, or when they see us at play, isn't it true that you've seen someone, maybe you're in the bank line or the grocery line, and you look a couple of persons ahead and you say, you know what, that looks like witnesses. Why do you say that? It's because of how they look or how they're dressed. And then perhaps you get closer to them and they turn to you and speak to you, and then you know they're not a witness, they just look like one, right? But other times you find out that it is a witness, just based on the way they look. So that's why it's important to change our thinking, learn that there is an acceptable way of dress, and that even if it does not fit our personal choices, it's important to make our choices agree with Jehovah God. Another way that we can show that our thinking agrees with God is to recognize that we can change and we can break away from the thinking of the world. If we do all that we can to make these changes, Jehovah says he will help us make the changes. We can find that out in Ephesians chapter 4. Verses 22 through 24. It says, 4:22 through 24, you were taught to put away the old personality that conforms to your former course of conduct and that is being corrupted according to its deceptive desires. And you should continue to be made new in your dominant mental attitude and should put on the new personality that was created according to God's will in true righteousness and loyalty. So the saying that we've had in the past, this is just who I am. This is the way I am. I can't change. Is that true? Is that a statement we should make? Absolutely not. Not according to the scriptures. Jehovah says we can be different. We can be made to change. We can be made new, and that force actuating our mind. That means the way we think can change. Doesn't matter what we thought when we grew up from infancy, we can change the way we think so that when a situation comes up, you hear the voice, Jehovah says, let's do it this way, and you do it that way, and you've changed. And the more you do it, and you realize, hey, this worked. The next time you do it, it worked. You realize, you know what? Jehovah is trustworthy. What he says I should do, because it will work out for me. Some other areas that we need to make changes in our thinking is in our relationship or our attitude towards our parents. Young ones, they know the scriptures, Ephesians 6:1-3, how important it is to obey their parents. That's the same thing as the voice. It's a little irritating. Parents always telling you, go clean your room, go do this, go do that. It's a little irritating, like the GPS voice. But could you actually make it through life without that voice? No, it's impossible. We cannot make the decisions we need to make without the instructions from our parents. And we're instructed, even if it's a step parent or a parent that does not share your beliefs in Jehovah God, we're still instructed to respect them, even on early into later years of life. We're still there to honor our parents. We have to take care of them. This is different from what the world does. We have to honor them all the way through life. So when a child is learning to become an adult and he's listened to those instructions, what's the number one thing that they hate doing? They hate getting that advice, right? But then later on in life, what happens? You know, Mom, Dad, thank you. You gave me what I needed. I needed it. So one of the ways we can think about this, the way we can consider this, is think of getting counsel or instructions like taking money from someone. If somebody came up to you and handed you $1, $2, doesn't matter, a small amount of money, what do? Take it, put it in your pocket, right? You don't think you need it at that time, but hey, they're giving away money, take it. So what happens later on, you're at the store and you need a drink or something, you realize, hey, I got $1 right here, I can use it. Receiving counsel from our parents or from a higher source is just like taking money. May not need it, put it in your pocket. You don't think you need it, put it in your pocket anyway. Store that counsel away, and at a later date, guess what? It will be there when you need it. Just like that voice. You're building up your conscience, and that voice is telling you, this is the way. And there you have the answer to your questions. Another way we need to take advantage of changing our attitude is towards our work. Many people feel that they only work, some people feel they need to work over and over again, constantly make more money. Every member of the family is working so they can make more money. They retire, and sometimes, unfortunately, they die right after retirement. And they never got to enjoy life. There's an interesting quote. I can't attribute it to anybody because I looked online and couldn't figure out who it was that made this quote. But it says, man sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money in order to recuperate his health. Then he's so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die. Then he dies, never having really lived. Ain't that interesting? So what does that mean? That means that, or that helps us appreciate that hard work is important, but if we don't have a life centered on doing God's will, that hard work is just only hard work. There's no fulfillment out of life. We saw at firsthand some of those brothers and sisters that were building this Kingdom Hall, brothers that had put Jehovah first and they had given up worldly possessions to be able to come work full time on this Kingdom Hall and others, these LEC workers. And you know, it seems they have a lot of good life. As we were working on this hall, they were always leaving to go to Hawaii, go to New York, traveling the world, enjoying life. And I said, how in the world you get these things? You don't even have a job. But they have them. Jehovah takes care of them. They're able to enjoy life. They're able to smile. Some of them, didn't matter what they were doing, they could hit their foot with a hammer and they're still smiling. Those guys were the happiest people you can think of. So it's very, very important that we put Jehovah first in our life and not allow our work or our personal lives to affect our worship to Jehovah. Now, as we've learned that there are certain areas of life we need to make these changes in our thinking. But at this point, we've made the changes. Life is pretty decent. We have a couple of problems, but life is still fairly good. We're enjoying life. We're making the right decisions. And it's like potholes in the road. We're driving along, you hit a pothole, but it's just temporary. You pass a pothole and you continue on your destination. That's what those anxieties of life are like sometimes. But we must recognize that keeping our thinking in agreement with God will bring blessings. You remember when you first met Jehovah? Do you remember how your life was? Perhaps it was like this. Imagine yourself, old car. It's a classic car, but it's old, it's beat up, rusted. That's supposed to be 57 Chevy Bel Air. Anyway, it's old and beat up. Our lives were like that when we first met Jehovah. But do you think Jehovah saw that when he met you, when he saw you, when brothers first came to your home and witnessed to you about him? That's not what he saw. This is what he saw. You see that? That's what happens. That's how our life is transformed when we accept Jehovah's instructions. When we listen to him, this is how Jehovah sees us. This is how our brothers and sisters will see us if we transform our lives in agreement with Jehovah's. Since Jehovah is molding us right now to make us change, we must allow it. Because if we resist, will there be any changes? There won't be any changes if we resist. Our meetings, our personal study, our wholesome association, all of those things help us to make these changes, to transform to something Jehovah sees as desirable. We must be alert to constantly changing conditions, because God thinking does not change, but our lives do. So as soon as we're met with a new problem, we have to go to Jehovah's Word. We have to listen to that voice so that our lives will be living in accordance with God's will. Therefore, when we stop putting TV before our personal study, our thinking will be in agreement with God's. When we stop making excuses for missing personal study and family worship, our thinking is in agreement with God's. When we stop glamorizing worldly lifestyles, we stop desiring those things of the world, our thinking is in agreement with God's. When we realize that we might have to quit our secular job so that it no longer interferes with our worship, our thinking agrees with God. When we start making excuses and reasons to stay here after the meeting to fellowship with your brothers and sisters, your family, your thinking is in agreement with God's. When we get rid of those immodest clothing, when we put it in the trash, get rid of it, our thinking is in agreement with God's. Yes, when we finally realize that seeking the kingdom first means seeking the kingdom first, our thinking is in agreement with God's. Yes, when we change our personalities, allow ourselves to be molded by Jehovah's Word, we prove that our thinking is in agreement with God's.
very much, Brother Greene. You gave us a lot of food for thought there. We want to continue to look for such shiny, pretty car and be approved by Jehovah God. So we thank you very much for that time and information.